This is TWiT.
When the original story from Bloomberg came out and was then immediately denied by many of the companies mentioned, this is the Supermicro hack, including Apple, Supermicro, Amazon, which uses the elemental hardware that uses Supermicro. A lot of people thought, Bloomberg, you got it wrong. Bloomberg never retracted. They said we have very good sources. They just, on Friday, put out another story, The Long Hack, how China exploited a U.S. tech supplier. For years, U.S. investigators found tampering in products made by Supermicro. The company says it was never told. They weren't doing it. Neither was the public. When that first story came out, I said, true or not, it is a very important warning about the dangers of the supply chain. You've got to protect your supply chain. Bloomberg now has a lot more details. I think you cannot, I don't care what denials you hear, you cannot deny this story. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Defense found thousands of its servers sending military network data to China, the result of code hidden in chips that handled the machine's startup process. In 2014, Intel discovered an elite Chinese hacking group had breached its network through a single server that downloaded malware from a supplier's update site. In 2015, the FBI warned multiple companies that Chinese operatives had concealed an extra chip loaded with backdoor code in one manufacturer's servers. In each of these distinct attacks, two things in common: China and Supermicro, which is a motherboard manufacturer in San Jose. They shared one other trait. U.S. spy masters discovered the manipulations but kept them largely secret as they tried to counter each one and learn more about China's capabilities. I know, Father Robert, you cover hacking, and I'm sure, you had... Did you, with the initial Supermicro report, what were your thoughts at the time?
We did. So on both TWiT and Know-How, we actually took a look at some of the supposedly affected motherboards from Supermicro. And we did our own set of tests on them. Really basic stuff, which is we let them run and we watched all the network traffic. Every single packet that was leaving the server for the course of a month. We saw nothing. Right. We saw absolutely nothing. We actually went back to the traces to look for traces of chips that were added. Absolutely nothing. Now, the response was, well, they didn't modify everything. And like you said,
it wasn't Supermicro. I want to make that very clear. It was in the supply chain. The motherboards would be shipped, and then at some point between shipment and arriving at the end user, they were modified. In fact,
absolutely,
Bloomberg says that neither Supermicro nor any of its employees has been accused of wrongdoing. Former U.S. officials who provided information for the story emphasized the company itself has not been the target of any counterintelligence investigation.
Right.
It's a supply chain attack.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, we know that that's a vulnerability. Everything that we use, from our networking equipment to our phones, are manufactured in China. So unless you've got someone there watching every step of the process, there is no way to guarantee that there's nothing added to a motherboard that could be sending data back. Now, there are a few weird things in the story that the way that Bloomberg reported it, they were reporting that laptops and motherboards were being they had malware in the BIOS, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, all of these machines use UEFI, which do checksums now. You shouldn't technically be able to do that. Sure, you can drop an extra chip, but if you're trying to tell me that China has developed a way to hack UEFI that is undetectable, I'm going to need more proof than you just bringing on a so-called expert saying, oh yeah, they've totally done that.
You've covered the story, I'm sure, Brian, both in October 2018 when the original story came out. I was really surprised on Friday to see Bloomberg double down on this. What's your thought?
Yeah, I actually hadn't seen that happened. Probably posted after I posted my show. I always come back to these when these things come up, or even like with the SolarWinds thing. Don't we just always have to assume that Apple, Facebook, there's spies from multiple countries working there actively at every factory point for software, for hardware, for whatever? There are spies working in these factories to inject things. Like, we just have to assume that that's been the case for years now, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah. That was my point, is whether you believe or don't believe the original story from October of 2018. it's clear this is a potential problem. These supply chain attacks are happening. They've happened over and over again, and we may, there's a real message that you've got to pay close attention to this stuff, and you can't assume that because it's arriving in a sealed box, it hasn't been tampered with. I'm surprised to see this again in Bloomberg Business Week. They have more sources. Again, they claim, sources in law enforcement in the U.S. military.
If a story was that controversial, and you went back and reported more and invested more resources in it, and then doubled down, like that's how many man hours. If this is a year later, you got to figure that they really feel strongly about this one.
Yeah. I mean,
and I get that, but what bothers me is they doubled down, and they brought in so-called experts, but the article that they wrote doesn't really provide any of the technical information we would need as a security community to verify that any of this is actually happening.
Right.
But I always wonder,
it comes down to it must be happening.
With those things, though, are we getting into areas where there is national security things where, like, they can't name names, they can't specifically mention an incident because the NSA or the CIA or whomever it is like, no, by the way, or the FBI, we're actively working on that, or the fact that we know that this happened, we don't want people to know that we know that this happened?
Yeah, I have a theory that because this has resurfaced, it looks to me like the original sources, and by the way, at the time there was some concern that the original sources were motivated by President Trump's animus towards China, that maybe this was a planted story because nobody was able to confirm it later. Here it is now. We are a couple of weeks into a new administration. It looks to me like the original sources of the story were concerned that nobody paid any attention, and went back to Bloomberg and said, "Guys, we gotta get people to wake up. They're not paying attention." Does that not seem credible? I agree with you, Robert. They haven't provided, come up with one motherboard with that chip on it.
Right. Well, look, this is absolutely credible. I have no problem believing that the Chinese government or state-run organizations are using the supply chain to spy. I have seen it in person from a Chinese company, from Huawei.
Right.
So that part that's obvious. Yes, that's going to happen. Where I get frustrated is, okay, I hear you. Give me something. Point me in the right direction so I can do some independent verification. And to the point that it might be the NSA stepping in, if there was a security letter, they wouldn't have even let them print the article. So,
well, that's that's what I think Brian's saying. And what I'm saying is they don't want to go on record, really, but they want to send an alarm.
There's somebody out there whose hair is on fire, and they're trying to scream about their hair being on fire as loudly as they can
without showing anybody the smoke. Right?
Because maybe they can't.
Yeah,
because
they can't.
They would be put in jail for revealing national security things.
My guess is that the reason why this was allowed to happen is because these types of infiltration attacks are probably very low priority. If it's a nation state that's getting into your network, they at least know if they are going to use that information for mass, that we would have a target to retaliate. So those are more of they're using it for economic benefits rather than attacking a city or a county or a state or even the nation. It is the actors that are the lone wolves. It's the actors that are that could just try to sow chaos because they know that the repercussions will not affect them, or they're not projecting the harm to themselves that would cause because of that. So my guess is that it was an insider that's trying to say we should prioritize this.
Yes.
And keeps leaking this information to the press so they get more resources internally to reprioritize these types of attack.